Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by the Sikh Research Institute. My name is Jasdeep Singh and I will be the host and moderator for today's session. The mission of the Sikh Research Institute is to provide educational resources to Sikhs to lead a Guru-inspired life. Sikhri is an inclusive resource for you, your family, your community, and 25 million Sikhs worldwide for educational programming, strategic solutions, and Gurmukhi content. I'd also like to introduce our presenter today, Sarbpreet Singh, who's a playwright, commentator, and poet, and has been writing while pursuing a career in technology for several years. His commentary has appeared on NPR's Morning Edition, the Boston Herald, the Providence Journal, the Milwaukee Journal, and several other newspapers and magazines. He also writes a weekly column for the popular cultural magazine, Sikh Shik. He's the founder and director of Gurmat Sangeet Project, a non-profit dedicated to the preservation of traditional Sikh music, and serves on the boards of various non-profits focused on service and social justice. He's very active in Boston interfaith circles and also recognized for his work by the Boston Globe. He's the co-author and co-director of the play Kultar's Mime, which is currently touring globally and has reignited the conversation about the 1984 Delhi massacre. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to Sarbpreet Singh to begin today's presentation. Also,
Wonderful. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. He's a little Sikh boy. His name is Kultar. Lives in a place they call Jamna Par. See his smiling cherubic face. He looks so cute. You can hardly tell. He's deaf and mute. Just your average child from a poor home is on first glance, I'm wont to say. I see him busy with his friends at play when the streets of Tilakvihar I roam. Little Billu, an elfin 9-year-old, plays hide and seek with our hero young. She's full of life, boisterous and bold, but sensitive too, quick to be stung. Oh, Billu, the little precocious child, aglow in the warmth of love and care, obedient, loving, sweet-tempered, mild, her smile would hardest heart ensnare. Father's darling, mother's pet, the precious one, in every way like a star she shone. What? Is that the same girl? It cannot be. Wicked illusion, what do my eyes see? Withered shell, pale cheeks, sunken eyes, no sign of the old spark or even life. What caused all this? What kind of strife? What changed laughter to heaving sighs? Angad is older than both of them. A street urchin now, he was a gem. It's been 2 years since he went to school. He's into petty theft and plays the fool. Wants to grow up tough to be a macho man. Does boast one day people near and far will know of Angad Singh of Tilakvihar. Under bluster and bravado hide he can, but those of you who've heard his screams do know for sure of his fearful dreams. Yes, Angad Singh was a hardy lad, was good at times, sometimes was bad. You could see him running from his room, his mother chasing him with a broom. Walked with a jump and a skip and a hop as he swaggered down the narrow street. As dear friends, strangers he would greet, and to chat and joke with all he'd stop. But fate's been too cruel, chance unkind. The once gregarious lad is blind. Sweet Rano, so fair, is a demure 19. Lucky she lives in her uncle's house. There was a time she was calm and serene, now she's jumpier than a little mouse. She's a lovely little lady, a trifle sad. Rumor has it she might even be mad. She's always lost in her private thoughts. She winds her way through the rickety cots of the local hospital's dingy wards. She was finally able to find some work, soothing, chasing demons that lurk in infant minds ripped into shards. Her body is young, eyes are old and wise. Sudden sound makes them widen in surprise. You may well ask what's all this about. What's so unique about this motley bunch, the deaf, mute boy, little girl, young lout? By now, my friends, you must have a hunch. A story we have to tell, indeed it's true. Tilakvihar? Now you have a clue. Clusters of houses, little shanty town, and dull shades of grey and dirty brown. Blister in the face of that cruel land, like many others of its colour and kind. Destitution, poverty, and the daily grind rub faces and dreams deep into the sand. And oh, what a story we have to tell. Burning passion, blind hate, and sanity's knell. We begin to see that all is not well. Each child in the town has a tale to tell. So what is Kultar's Mime? It's an immersive play that blends poetry, music, painting, and theater to tell the stories of two massacres. Kishinev in 1903, when Jews were attacked in a town that is now in the country Moldova, was the Russian province of Bessarabia then, and Delhi 1984, of course, that all of us know about. The play is drawn from two poems about these massacres. The first one is In the City of Slaughter by very well-known Hebrew poet Haim Bialik. The second one is a poem of the same name, Kultar's Mime, that I wrote several years ago. The play was conceived and composed by J Mehr Kaur, who attends Smith College and studies theater. Kishinev and Delhi, two cities, miles apart. No common tongue, no common creed, yet bound by ties that hidden lie. But if you slip off your skin and let your spirit float silently among restless ghosts, a most vexing murmur you will hear, anguished cries, heaving sighs, bitter tears, racking fears. What tongue is this, you will ask, perturbed? No answer, none, your ears will hear. For the spirits speak a language strange, which is far, far beyond your ken. It is the tongue of every ghost, of every maid and every crone, of every mother and every child, whose innocent life and smiling eyes the savage sword of hate did blight. So let's talk about Kishinev and Delhi. On April 6, 1903, Kishinev, the capital of the Russian province of Bessarabia, erupted in violence. A horrific pogrom was organized targeting the Jewish population of Kishinev. After 3 days of violence, 49 Jews lay dead, 500 wounded, 1,300 homes and businesses were destroyed, and 2,000 families were left homeless. 81 years later, Delhi, the capital of the largest democracy in the world, India, was witness to a horror of even greater proportions. On October 31st, 1984, Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, was shot dead by her Sikh bodyguards, who were, of course, intent on punishing her for her attack on the Sri Harmandir Sahib, which had occurred in June of that year. In retaliation, her political party, the Congress Party, unleashed an orgy of murder, rape, and arson on the Sikh residents of Delhi, in which more than 3,000 lost their lives. Haim Bialik was a young student in Odessa when the Kishinev massacre occurred. He was sent to Kishinev to write a report on what had happened and talk to the survivors. Bialik was so shaken up by what he saw. What poured out of him was this poem called In the City of Slaughter, which is very well known, definitely in the Jewish community, and had a huge impact on the Jewish community. Using powerful imagery in his poem, Bialik describes the horror that descended upon the Jewish residents of the city. Kultar's Mime is a poem that I wrote about 25 years ago as a young man. After coming to this country, I came to this country in 1987, 3 years after the events of 1984. And if we have time in the webinar, I'll briefly talk about the genesis of the poem. But let's keep moving and talk about the play. So there are eerie similarities between the two massacres. In both, minority communities were targeted with violence. In both, rumor, innuendo, and libel were used to stoke passions and incite hatred. The scale was very different, but the method employed was startlingly similar. And in the end, innocent people were targeted simply because of who they were. The imagery of the two poems is very similar, and maybe that's not a huge surprise because, after all, they do address very similar incidents. Kultar's Mime was first performed in June of 2013 with a cast of high school actors from Hopkinton, Massachusetts, where J Mehr Kaur graduated from a year earlier, so she was in Smith College at that time. And the first production was in the summer of 2013. There's a typo on the slide. In 2014, actually, Kultar's Mime was revived as a Sikhri presentation. And there's a lot of serendipity in life, and so there is in Kultar's Mime story as well. I had reached out to Harinder Singh, the CEO of Sikhri, as I was planning to publish the poem and the play. And he got me in touch with Taranjeet Kaur in Canada, in Ottawa, who was working on organizing perhaps the first ever academic conference in about 1984. And as we were brainstorming about who might be a good academic to write a foreword, the notion came up that why not present Kultar's Mime, the play, at this academic conference. From those humble beginnings was born the revival of Kultar's Mime. The Sikh Research Institute stepped up and very kindly offered a platform to develop the production, to bring on board a new cast. And at that time, we felt that if we're able to mount 3 or 4 shows in addition to the Ottawa show at the conference, that will be a great success for the production. And of course, you're going to learn where the production went, and it certainly defied all of our early expectations. Let's talk a little bit about the concept of the play. The play is set in an art gallery, and as I mentioned at the start of the conversation, this is an immersive work. The stage is set up as an art gallery. There are 8 paintings that were painted by Evan Lee Davis, a young artist who also attends Smith College. Mehr Kaur commissioned her to do this art in response to the poem. These 8 paintings appear on stage as the backdrop, and the 5 actors who are playing artists who are part of a Jewish collective are on stage at that time, and then the audience is let into the art gallery, so to speak, and the immersive experience has begun. So this collective of young Jewish artists decides to launch an art exhibition on Kishinev. And as they recite lines from Bialik's poem, there's a powerful moment in which, prompted by one of the actors, they realize that embracing the pain of the quote-unquote other would be a tremendously powerful way of acknowledging the victims of Kishinev, and that's what takes them to Delhi. They seek inspiration from the so-called Black Book that one of the artists produces, and we'll talk about the Black Book later on in the webinar if we have some time. And then they choose in this powerful moment to focus on Delhi rather than Kishinev. The point being made, of course, is that all innocent victims are the same, and by honoring one set of innocent victims, we honor all innocent victims. How shall we grieve for the children of Kishinev? What is the price to be paid? Surely they didn't die in vain. Are they forgotten? Does the world remember? Questions, questions without answers. I might have an answer. This from the artist who holds up the Black Book. What is this? What kind of answer? This book of black, it burns my hand. This story dark from a distant land. Come hither, follow, aloud it screams. Your head I'll fill with fevered dreams. You will behold a living hell, discordant chime of desolate bell, where shattered children drag their feet, spirits unquiet in each menacing street. Devoid of hope, their eyes are bleak. Not even vengeance do they seek. The memories fade, the bruises pale, as untold withers their bitter tale. Are there truly none to calm their fears? To hear their tales? To dry their tears? Why should we look to someone else? For is this not our sacred creed? Why should we not fling out our arms to tightly clasp the ones who bleed? Shall we go to Delhi then, seeking justice or revenge? Will we rant? Will we rave? Will we peer in every grave? We shall do all that and more, this hoary tale of gristle and gore. And yes, before we can be free, a Kishinev new we need to see. You speak in riddles, a Kishinev new? There is but one beneath the sun, red with the blood of blameless Jews. Oh, how I wish your words were true. But streams of blood of many hues flow out of yawning pits of hate. And when these pitiless floods abate, Kishinevs sprout in their gory wake. Let's talk about what happened in 1984. As we all know, Mrs. Gandhi was shot dead by her Sikh bodyguards. The circumstances around the shooting continue to be tremendously murky, but that is not the subject of today's conversation, so we won't delve into that. Suffice it to say, as she lay dead, her political party got busy and started organizing the most horrific massacre that India had seen after the horrors of partition in 1947. Somewhere in the city, in a darkened room, the plotters gather and make their plans. They seek to spread mayhem and doom, to begin a surreal, murderous dance. Deep, piercing eyes, thick tuft on chin, lyricist of gruesome song of sin. Pot-bellied, thin hair, and glasses dark, face mottled with spots and many a mark. Trade union leader, minister to be, once rabble-rouser, political leader now. Before him all the petty criminals bow, is the last one of the notorious three. The notorious three. This fabulous painting by Evan Lee depicts three Congress leaders who have been cited in many human rights reports as the main organizers of the rank and file, who actually went around directing the massacre and rewarding people. HKL Bhagat, who appears on the left, who has now died of natural causes. He was a minister in the Union government. Lalit Makin, who was a prominent Congress politician and a minister. He was subsequently assassinated by Sikh militants. And on the right, Jagdish Tytler, who continues to be a politician in India, and in a travesty of justice that is so hard to stomach, until a few years ago continued to serve as a minister in the Congress government. From up above, the orders have come to teach a lesson to the arrogant scum who dared defy and shake a fist at the power of the glorious crown. They must be made to recant, desist, their head so proud. They must hang down. What better chance could there ever be of a brilliant, dazzling victory? The nation's shocked, now silent still. In the human rights reports, in the reports produced by human rights groups that appeared in the wake of the massacre, a constant theme was that when lower-level functionaries of the Congress Party were asked how the massacre came about, most of them would mumble, "Hukam upar se aaya tha," or in other words, the orders came from up above. Names were named, but the fact of the matter is that 30 years later, none of the senior people who were clearly named by the victims have been brought to book. Plunder and kill till you've had your fill. Seek out the ones with beards and long hair. Loot their houses and rape their wives. Violate their daughters and take their lives. Cast them all into depths of despair. Teach them the price of raising their head. Pile the streets high with maimed and dead. Of course, this is an artistic representation of what happened. But the impunity with which the mobs attacked Sikhs in Delhi was astounding. They had been reassured by their leaders that for the next few days they had license to go and do all of these horrific things, and nothing would happen to them. There would be no consequences. The police would not interfere. And if you read the human rights reports carefully, you will find numerous instances of where the police stood idly by. Excuse me. In other instances where the police, whenever Sikhs tried to defend themselves, the police intervened, disarmed the Sikhs, told them that they should give up their weapons because that would perhaps reduce the chance of a confrontation, and then they would go back to the waiting mobs and tell them, these people have now been disarmed, go get them. numerous instances of this nature. Some of the stories that are told in the play, and I will share with you where these stories came from. He grabs Billu by the hand and they run, away from their homes towards the square, where in times forgotten, happier, fair, the children would gather, have some fun, and laugh and play in the cooling shade of the towering banyan's natural arcade. Turns to the tree, his shoulders heave. He looks like he's jumping up and down. Each fiber of his body seems to grieve. On his face, you can see a puzzled frown. He drags to the tree a most heavy load, stops at every step to prod it and goad. When it tries to fight him and to resist, he pounds on it with his feet and fist, stretches his hand for an imagined rope, and fashions from it a hangman's noose, peers at it closely, checks if it's loose, calls mates imaginary to help him cope with his struggling father as he slips the noose around his neck and trips. Kultar becomes his own father then. His eyes roll around, legs do twitch. His agony, my friends, beyond our ken. Lifeless body falls into the ditch. Eyes do bulge, tongue does protrude, legs leaden as from granite hewed. And thus does the little boy reprise his father's violent, tragic demise. She's never been so afraid in her life. She's too young and innocent to comprehend. As they come to her waving stick and knife, she thinks they'll kill her. This is the end. Sweet Rano, don't bother to hold your breath. Pray harder yet but for the boon of death. Don't fear the knife, embrace it you must. It's all that lies twin you and their lust. You're young and you cannot even think these are not men but lust-crazed beasts. Tonight you're one of their carnal feasts. There are depths to which they're yet to sink. They circle around like beasts of prey. Her face, her beautiful face, is pallid, ashen, gray. All she can see is a huge circle of hands. Fingers that flex, squirm in lecherous glee. Big hands, small hands, dark hands, pale hands. On all of them spots of blood she can see. The lascivious hands and their lewd dance. Realization comes to her in a single glance. She begins to tremble and frightfully shake as a firm hold on her body the hands take. Her body is lifted high up in the air by the hands and carried into the next room. Oh, desperate day of pain, death, and doom. She struggles, kicks, weeps, tears at her hair. They toss her roughly on a rickety bed, a resounding blow she feels on her head. The hands get to work to do their cruel deed. Her innocent body shrinks in utter disgust. The maddened hands pick up terrible speed to maul the object of their bestial lust. Fearsome feeding frenzy without a hitch, they tear into shreds each and every stitch. She feels a most violent, searing pain, and again and again and again and again, by ravenous mouths the hands are joined. They bite and spit out her flesh and blood, young innocent body, pure and tender bud, violated and wasted, her honor purloined. Sated, spent, the beasts about her drool, of raw bubbling flesh, her body a pool. In the midst of the mob, Billu sees a face familiar from another time and place. For a friendly hand the child does grope. On her face appears a dim ray of hope. She says, "Uncle, you're my father's friend. Please save him, for he will die for sure. You know him well, you shared food and more. How can you cast him off, let his life end?" For her trouble she gets a slap on her face. sends her to the ground in a painful daze. Her father lies in the dust supine. They set on him with blows and kicks. His friends shouts loudest, "Kill the swine!" And they beat him once more with sticks. The sobbing Billu crawls through the band and takes her father's bloody hand, looks around and sees a scene from hell. But wait, what's that terrible smell? Her father's clothes are suddenly wet. Stream of liquid is poured from a can. A deluge of gasoline covers the man. The terrified child, her father's pet, sobs turn to screams pitched even higher as they light a match and set him on fire. The child, still dazed from the hard blow, refuses to let go of her father's hand. Pain and grief dull her mind, she's slow. She gazes blankly, fails to understand. Pull the child away, she must be mad. We don't kill babies, we're not that bad. Hands grasp her, and so hard they try, but they cannot infant fingers pry. Father and daughter, their bodies merge. They scream in unison, writhe in concert, heart-rending sounds of pain and hurt. They kick her, scream, cajole her, urge, but with a grip firm, deadlier than death, she hangs on till his very last breath. Her little hands the flames did char, her eyebrows and her hair are burnt. Her face is the color of coal tar, the crowd silent, lessons learnt. Their heads do now hang down in shame. They thought it was some kind of game. Few voices of reason are heard to plead. They carry lurid tales of violence seen to the lackeys of the proud fallen queen. Help them, they beg, to the death they bleed. Proud inheritor of your mother's throne, forget not you're all mortal men. The seeds of violence that have been sown will sprout in each desert, hill, and glen. They'll flower, and when fruit they bear, cloaks of lies they'll to shreds tear. You don't know what evil you've done. You are the inheritor, fortunate son. The tears and sighs of the wounded ones will come together in a terrible curse, will goad you, and yours indeed do worse. The widowed wives and the orphaned sons, each and every day and night they'll pray, a measure of their pain you'll feel some day. Her haughty son does this statement make: when a great tree falls, earth does shake. Rajiv Gandhi was the Indira Gandhi's older son, who was being groomed to succeed her, was perhaps the greatest beneficiary of what happened in 1984. In the strong pro-Congress wave that followed in the next elections, his party won an unprecedented majority in parliament and he was voted into power. He actually did make that statement when people went up to him and said, "Stop the slaughter of the Sikhs in Delhi," and he had the power to stop it. His response was, well, when a tree falls, when a large tree falls, the earth is bound to shake. What do you expect? There's a lot of power in the curse of someone who's been hurt. Rajiv Gandhi didn't get to enjoy his newfound power for very long. He was blown to bits by a suicide bomber several years ago. The context, of course, was a different insurgency which was going on in Sri Lanka at that time. And again, we won't go into that history. But the words that you just heard echo the frustration and pain the survivors must have felt when they perceived Indira Gandhi's proud son, and when they read in the newspapers that all that he had to say when he learned of the massacre of the Sikhs, who ironically were in most part strong supporters of his late mother, was that when a great tree falls, the earth inevitably has to shake. I will speak very briefly about the genesis of Kultar's Mime, the poem, which was written about 25 years ago. It was influenced primarily by three works that I read after coming to the US. The first one is the so-called Black Book. Its actual title is Who Are the Guilty? And it was compiled by the People's Union for Civil Liberties and the People's Union for Democratic Rights, two civil rights organizations in India, under the aegis of Justice Tarkunde, who was a highly respected judge of the Bombay High Court. This report is an amazing piece of work where activists, all non-Sikh, fanned out into various parts of Delhi, interviewed survivors, interviewed onlookers, and painstakingly documented neighborhood by neighborhood what had happened, who the perpetrators were. It was immediately banned in India. The producer of the report was arrested, charged with sedition. Of course, he was released later. But this is a document which is available on the web, and I would encourage anyone who wants to learn and get factual information about what happened in 1984 to read this document. It's a hugely important historical record, as is an article called Gangster Rule, written by Madhu Kishwar, who, in sharp contrast to most of the press in India at that time, which either subjected to censorship by the government or applied self-censorship, and really tried to whitewash the massacre as a riot. In sharp contrast to all of that reporting, Madhu Kishwar told it like it was in her magazine. This article is also widely available. The third thing that I read that profoundly influenced me was an academic paper by a Delhi anthropologist, Dr. Veena Das, who is now at Johns Hopkins. She followed the stories she followed the children who survived 1984 and documented some of their stories in this paper. And a couple of stories really caught my attention. One of them was the story of a deaf-mute boy called Avtar, who saw his father being lynched before his very eyes, and of course being deaf and mute. He had no way of articulating his pain. Whenever the memories of his father's lynching would invade his head, this little boy would start miming what happened to his father. So the story of Kultar, unfortunately, is a true story. The little girl who held on to her father's hand all the while he was being burned alive after being doused with gasoline is also a true story that appeared in Dr. Das's paper. The rape of Rano is based on numerous instances of Sikh women being raped during the 1984 massacre. I mean, this is a part of global violence where whenever you have these instances of genocide and ethnic cleansing, attacking women and brutalizing them is a horrendous tool that is used over and over and over again. And it is absolutely shameful that even after the reports have documented the names of the perpetrators, many of them have died natural deaths and several still roam the streets of Delhi with impunity. Let's talk a little bit about where the production has been, starting from the objective that we had put out to have 5 performances. It's had 28 performances so far across 3 continents and 4 countries. We've been to the UK twice. We've performed in the US and in India and in Canada. And we're actually readying for our second India tour that I'll talk about in a second. We've received fabulous press coverage. We were featured live on the Nihal show on the BBC, which is watched by about 500,000 listeners. We had a live appearance on the Sikh channel in the UK, on public Portland radio, not a live appearance. Portland Public Radio did a program on Kultar's Mime recently, and every major newspaper in India, they're all listed over here, wrote articles about Kultar's Mime when we went there in Delhi. I'll skip the testimonials and headlines in the interest of time. This will be up on the web and you can all look at it. Let's talk about restarting the conversation about 1984. Brothers and sisters, we hear you. Don't ever think that we'll forget. Sweet martyrs, we're in your debt. Millions more, they can hear you too. Look in our eyes, tears pungent brine. Your resting place to us is a shrine. Not warriors nor heroes were you, just common folk from common stock. You did not ask for the martyr's brew that made you different from the flock. You were meek, you sought not to lead. You had no wish to suffer or bleed. Was it destiny or a quirk of fate exalted you to this hallowed state? To the halls of martyrs that did send, nameless victims of turbulent times, what did you do, commit what crimes to merit such a violent, inhuman end, whose visions cause our blood to chill, make even relentless time stand still? My friends, we come from places afar to lay roses at the shrines of Tilakvihar. Each day we think of this gruesome deed. Forever, forever our hearts will bleed. Your agony for us is a burning cross. We will gladly bear it upon our back. Our memory will never loosen or slack. You'll always shine in history's dross. We'll never forget your terrible pain. Your suffering will not be in vain. Our journey started in Boston, where we had a performance at Harvard and another one at a theater in Somerville. And then we proceeded to Ottawa, where this picture is from. This was part of the academic conference on 1984. And what we were starting to discover was that the production obviously is very intense and emotional. You've just heard some of the words. The actors do a tremendous job of conveying the emotions, and those of you who have seen the play know exactly what I'm talking about. The play is very intense, and what we discovered was that having a conversation with the audience after the play always was very cathartic for the audience. There were tremendous insights and moments of great poignancy. I remember in Ottawa, there was a gentleman who spoke very articulately about his experiences in 1984. It turned out that his son, who was in his early 20s, was in the audience as well. And later on, we learned that father and son had never had a conversation about 1984. This was also echoed after our Toronto performance. By the way, this is where the picture is from. We had a wonderful audience in Toronto, lots of young people, college-age students who really engaged with the material, and subsequently a mother and a daughter wrote a review of the play in which they echoed exactly the same sentiments, that the play had really encouraged them to start talking about a subject that mother and daughter had never talked about. Delhi was a very interesting part of our journey. We didn't quite know what to expect. We didn't know if the officials in Delhi would even allow us to perform, but we had 3 very successful shows on the exact 30-year anniversary of 1984. The audience featured members of parliament, one of whom is featured on this photograph, ambassadors, Indian ambassadors to various countries, religious leaders. There are very well-known activists in this picture, Dr. Uma Chakravarti, who actually did a lot of the work that went into the human rights reports after 1984, and who wrote a 600-page book about the survivors of 1984. So we performed in Delhi on the exact 30-year anniversary before a very, very interesting audience of intellectuals, activists, government officials. We had the opportunity to meet with Sardar Harvinder Singh Phulka, a person that I admire greatly. He's one of the few lone voices that has been agitating for justice for the past 30 years. And in fact, Phulkaji is trying to arrange a special show in Delhi during our upcoming trip. And it was really an honor for the cast and crew to meet with him. He's been doing tremendous work. One of our most interesting engagements was in a small village called Preetnagar, about 20 kilometers out of Amritsar, where we performed for a mostly rural, mostly non-English speaking audience. And to our surprise, this audience engaged with the play no differently from an audience at Columbia University or Stanford University. The reactions were very similar. We thought we might lose the audience, but pin drop silence and nobody moved during the play. It was quite the experience. When we were doing our dramaturgical work, this is just a fun slide that I wanted to put up. I had promised the cast that if we go to India, you will definitely go to Sri Harmandir Sahib, and so we did. We performed in Amritsar, where again we had a very powerful show with wonderful engagement from the audience, which included a lot of intellectuals, leaders. Similar experiences in Chandigarh, where we were hosted by the Punjab Arts Council, the apex arts body of the Punjab government. We went on to Wolverhampton, where we performed before a crowd of more than 1,000 people, which of course was overwhelmingly from the Sikh community in the British Midlands, but also a large number of British MPs and members of the House of Lords. And our next performance was a memorable one for us. Here we are with Fabian Hamilton, who is a Labour MP from Leeds at Westminster. So Kultar's Mime was performed at Westminster in British Parliament for MPs. And here I have to digress and just say that one of the greatest high points of my trip with Kultar's Mime was when I was allowed to pass through security at British Parliament wearing my city sahib. That was quite the experience. I just wanted to share that. This is a photograph from our performance at Stanford, where again we had a wonderful audience that engaged with us. So everywhere that we've gone, we've had powerful engagement with audiences. We've had lots of survivor stories with people who were affected by 1984 themselves, people who have pledged to talk to their kids, young people who step up and want to do other things of this nature. Which, and by the way, the person that you see at the bottom right of that picture is Jaskaran Kaur of Insaf, who was the moderator for our panel at Stanford, who I greatly admire personally, and who's been doing wonderful, wonderful work in the field of human rights for several years. So let's talk about reviving the conversation about 1984. And why is it important, and what are some of the insights that I've got and the team has got from all of these performances and visits? I think it's pretty fair to say that conversation about 1984 has all but disappeared. And in India, it's quite understandable because nobody really has a stake in keeping 1984 at the forefront of public discourse and dialogue. I mean, why? Who would want to do it other than Sikhs? Of course, Sikhs in India don't want to invite trouble by dwelling on 1984, with the exception of a few people like Sardar Harvinder Singh Phulka. A very insidious thing that young people who were born and raised in the US perhaps may not be aware of, and I certainly was, and I carried this burden of guilt with me when I left India. A lot of people, even good-hearted, well-meaning people in India to this day, while they will freely admit that what happened in 1984 was horrible, they probably have a sneaking feeling in the back of their heads that the Sikhs maybe kind of asked for it. And this is ubiquitous, it's pervasive, and the fact that this feeling persists is no accident, because the media and the government in the 1980s spent tremendous resources trying to make the nation believe that the Sikhs were evil and they were intent on terrorizing the country and breaking it apart. The community has, in a certain sense, repressed the trauma of 1984. There's a line in the poem which says, "Proud community, courage was its fame, hangs down its head and weeps in shame." We were the ones who were supposed to be the city sab wearing protectors of the weak and the oppressed. And all of this happened to us. It's not an easy thing to deal with. Mixed in with the anger are feelings of shame and guilt and inadequacy that we were not able to protect our sisters and our daughters and our children and our elderly. And all of this happened to us. So the question is, why should we remember? Here are some of the counter arguments to remembering. 30 years have passed. Why don't you guys just move on? Talking about 1984 is political. Talking about 1984 exclusively ignores the, quote, other side of the coin. Art like Kultar's Mime will incite people to violence and vengeance. Talking about 1984, isn't it anti-India? Isn't it anti-Hindu? Is that what Sikhs are supposed to do? These are real questions that have been asked, by the way. Each of these is a real question. And the answer to all of these questions simply can be found in a basic understanding of who we are. 30 years have passed, we should forget. In our ardas, each and every time, we still remember those innocents who were butchered by Zakaria Khan and Mir Mannu and Massa Rangar and Ahmed Shah Abdali hundreds of years ago. We haven't forgotten them. Why should we forget those who suffered the same fate 30 years ago? Is talking about 1984 political? Of course it is. As long as there is oppression, talking about oppression and fighting oppression will always be political. And that's who we are. Why should we shy away from that? The other side of the coin? What other side of the coin? In Chandigarh, we had a well-known journalist who publishes a magazine in Chandigarh who has suffered personally tragedy in the context of 1984, got up and started a diatribe where she said that the play was very one-sided because it didn't take into account what the Sikhs had done in the Punjab. This argument is absolutely false. No matter what happened anywhere else, nothing can ever justify the kind of violence that descended on innocent people in Delhi. No matter what had happened anywhere, there was simply no relationship between these people and the acts that people may want to lay at the doorsteps of the Sikhs in the 1980s. This massacre and every massacre of innocents stands alone. There is no notion of the other side. Talking about the other side of the coin is code for saying that in some instances doing this to innocents is okay, and we all know that it's not okay. Will art like Kultar's Mime incite people to violence? I don't think so. Kultar's Mime doesn't talk about vengeance. It talks about honoring the memory of innocent victims. It talks about preempting their memory from being effaced from collective memory. I will share something very briefly. I know we're into the Q&A time. Many years ago, I read a novel that continues to be one of my favorite three novels, 30 years later. It's 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And the one thing that I can never forget in the novel is a massacre which is orchestrated by a banana company in an unnamed banana republic, where the tragedy of the massacre is compounded by the fact that the banana company manages to eradicate it completely from collective memory. That is the purpose of art like Kultar's Mime. We don't want anyone to forget, and I hope that there will be 100 other pieces of art like this, whether it's film, theater, books, poetry, that will go on to tell similar stories. Nothing in Kultar's Mime is anti-Indian. Nothing in Kultar's Mime is anti-Hindu. All that it says is that it's wrong, it's absolutely unacceptable to bring this kind of violence upon the heads of innocent people simply because of who they are. Will Kultar's Mime bring about justice? I say that almost tongue-in-cheek. The short answer is no. No one piece of art will ever accomplish that. The purpose of the play is to spark a conversation. That it has done. Embracing the pain of the other is fundamental to our ethos as Sikhs, and the play turns that premise on its head in a couple of very interesting ways by telling the story of the Jews, by having a group of Caucasian actors telling the story of Sikhs, which all really reinforces the key message that at the end of the day, all innocent victims are the same. There are many paths to justice and closure for us. The political climate in India, even after we visited in October, has changed. We don't have time to delve into that. Maybe we'll talk about it in the Q&A. But I am always hopeful. I think that there is a possibility for closure, and every means has not been exhausted yet. My fondest hope is that the success of Kultar's Mime will inspire many young Sikhs towards activism and advocacy. And it's important to remember not just about Sikh causes, but really about anyone being victimized. Why? Because that's who we are. At least that's who we are supposed to be. And if we don't think that way, well, perhaps it's time to start thinking that way. Trust me, if we embrace the pain of the world, there is no way that the world will not embrace our pain in return. Finally, come see the play. We're going to be in India March 14th through the 22nd in Bombay, Calcutta, Bangalore, Chennai, and Delhi. Subsequently, we have plans to go to Vancouver, Ottawa, potentially Scotland, potentially Australia, several US cities like Detroit, Houston, and Chicago. If you wish to bring it to your community, there's an email address up there, km1984@sikhtree.org. And that is the end of the presentation, and I'll turn it back to our moderator.
Thank you, Virji, for an awesome presentation. I do have a few questions that the audience had asked. I'll go ahead and unmute Amrik Bhamra from Salisbury, UK. He has a microphone, so he can ask that question or maybe make a comment himself. Give me one moment. Amrik, you should be good to go.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Loud and clear.
Right. Well, first of all, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Yes, I am a follower of the activities of Sikhri, and I have met Harinder Singh a couple of times when he was over here in the UK. I'm very intrigued by this play that you have described to us, and I think it's a very positive move. And really, it's more. Mine was more of a comment rather than a question. But the only question I have is, if somebody could follow Kultar's Mime with possibly, I think you've mentioned this as well in your conversations, that something about what went on in Punjab for the after 1984, for the next 10 years, because that was state organized, managed violence against ordinary people as well. And we've had few programs, but I think mostly interviews and statements by ex-policemen from Punjab, on programs like Sikh Channel. But I think on the whole, this is a very good vehicle for enlightening the world. I think we need to do that very, very strongly and very, very forcefully. And I think, Jews are a very good example to us.
Thank you for that comment. I would briefly respond to a couple of things that you said. Very much in agreement with you. I will give everyone a sneak peek of one of my next projects. I agree that the period in the Punjab between 1984, the decade after 1984, is fertile ground for exploration. There is a lot of murkiness about who was doing what to whom. I have a few references that I consider fairly credible. Joyce Pettigrew's book, Cynthia Campbell's book, and a few others. So I am actually working on a theatrical play which will be set in Punjab during that time period, and I guess watch this space.
Oh, well, we will. Just a minor point. You've taken the play around various prominent positions around the globe. You didn't mention Europe, but I mean, there are populations in France and Germany and Italy of Sikhs living. I was wondering whether you have any plans in that direction.
The plans, at one point, the Sikh Federation, which had invited us to the UK, was quite keen on taking us exactly to those places, specifically Paris, I forget which city in Italy, and Frankfurt and Brussels. So I am trying to find partners in either the UK or Europe who can help make this possible. We are actively exploring performances in Scotland. So when we come to Scotland, if we do end up going to Scotland, it might be easy to piggyback 4 to 6 European performances onto that tour. So again, if you know of people who want to support
yes, people do exist on Facebook. I mean, there is a strong presence of Sikh entities within France. And incidentally, French are very supportive. I mean, one of the descendants of General Allard lives in the south of France, and he's in contact with Sikh guys who live in France. And of course, they all speak French. And this is a very good opportunity for you to take the play to France.
Indeed. So since we are quite short on time, I will ask that you follow up with an email to km1984@sikri.org. Let's connect and explore this further. I'm on board for sure.
Could you repeat the email address, please?
km1984, Kultar's Mind, km1984@sikri.org.
Okay.
It should be on the screen. Yeah, Amrik should be on the screen also. The email is. That's the slide that.
Okay. Yes, I have. Yes, I have seen it. Yes, I've
seen it. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you very much,
Amrik. Thank you very much. The next question is from Chandrapreet Jaspal from Detroit, Michigan. And he was he's actually done his dentistry from India, and he visited Golden Temple, and the Granthi over there mentioned to him that 1984 was the Sikhs' fault, and also there's a myth, that Bhindranwala was hired by the Congress. What is the real truth? He asks, and he asks for forgiveness for his ignorance also.
Well, it's a difficult, complicated question, but let me take a crack at it based on what I know, and I'm certainly not a huge expert on that period. 1984 was the fault of the Sikhs. Absolute nonsense. absolute nonsense. I mean, that's the propaganda that the government, made sure was pervasive at that time very successfully. And what we are reaping today is the consequence of that propaganda machine that was in full flow 30 years ago. The history of that period is complicated. The Sikhs were agitating for what a lot of people, including non-Sikhs, believed were legitimate political rights. The situation did get out of hand. Arguably, the government had a very large hand in letting the situation get out of hand as well. About Janel Singh Pindrawale and his association with Congress, with the Congress Party, there's a lot of material out there that you can read. This is what I think is probably close to the truth for whatever it's worth. At one point, the Congress Party did try to leverage Janel Singh Pindrawale in an attempt to weaken the Sikhs and split the Sikhs because they saw the Akalis in the Punjab getting more and more popular. So they saw Janel Singh Pindrawale as somebody who could potentially split the Sikh vote away from the Akalis. Now, just because they thought that he would be somebody that they could use to their political ends, does that make him their tool? I don't think so. The fact of the matter is that there was a point at which Janel Singh Pindrawale's charisma and the outsized personality that he had got to a point where he was definitely and unequivocally not controlled by anyone, much less the Congress. And, if he had been a tool of the Congress, arguably there would have been no reason for Operation Blue Star, and a lot of things would not have happened. Having said all of that, there's a lot of stuff that's been written out there from many, many different angles and perspectives. My advice to any young person and any person who wants to educate themselves is go find a breadth of material, look carefully at who's produced it, what their agendas are, be skeptical, look at all possible viewpoints, and then form your own opinion. The information is out there.
Thank you, Virji. The next question is from Pradeep Singh. He asks, what should the reaction be for Sikhs now? Because in India, it's a BJP government. It might have been possible. It could, well, his question, as I'm reading it, could be, it is possible potentially in the future that this similar kind of a genocide might occur. And what can we do to be prepared for that to not happen?
So I did allude to the fact that the political climate in India has changed in fairly interesting ways, even after we visited last October. On December 27th, the Home Minister of India, Rajnath Singh, who is the second most powerful politician in India, went to Tilakvihar. Of course, he was trawling. Tilakvihar is the widow colony in Delhi where the survivors were settled. Of course, he was trawling for Sikh votes, and we can be a little cynical. But the fact of the matter is, he opened his mouth and said what happened in 1984 was genocide. The second most important politician in India said that. No matter what his motivation was, what has said cannot be unsaid. That's a huge step forward. He went on to say that the perpetrators should be punished. Other politicians have said it as well, but nobody has called it genocide before. The Delhi administration now is in the hands of the Aam Aadmi Party, and the head of the party, Kejriwal, has on multiple occasions said that bringing the perpetrators to book is one of his priorities. Let's wait and see. The climate has definitely changed. Can something like this happen again? Of course it can. Of course it can. It's happening today. And, my advice to all of, especially young people on this webinar would be very concerned that this can happen to Sikhs in India. But let me ask you, why should you be any less concerned about what's happening to the Yazidis? Why should you be any less concerned about the fact that somebody rounded up 20 Coptic Christians and shot them in the head in Libya for no reason other than the fact that they were Christians. Horrible things like these, unfortunately, are alive and well and with us 30 years after 1984. Please, please, let's expand our worldview. Let's go beyond our own pain. Everybody talks about their own pain. It's no big deal, but we're supposed to be different. We were given a mission. If you wear a siri saab, don't forget what that symbolizes. So my response to you specifically is, please embrace everyone's pain, and very specifically, what we can do to prevent further instances of genocide is to make sure that previous instances are never forgotten and the quest for justice never stops. I think that that's what each one of us can do.
Appreciate that, BG. There is a question from Amitoj Singh, and he mentions that he attended the play at Columbia University, and there were two academics who asked questions at that play. He says Sikhs do not normally take the victim standpoint. Do you think that this play actually does that?
Okay, so yes, we had a couple of academics, and they made two interesting and different points during the Columbia performance. Does this portray Sikhs as victims? Is a tough question to answer. The fact of the matter is that Sikhs were victimized in 1984, and ignoring that out of bravado, in my view, is not a smart thing to do. Does it mean that Sikhs have become weak as a result of 1984? No. You know, we survived the Vardaka Lukara. Of course, we will survive 84, and we have survived 84, and we will thrive. I think that it's very legitimate to talk about issues of violence perpetrated against innocents, whether it's against the Jews, whether it's the Palestinians or the Yazidis or whomever. It's our job as Sikhs to do it. And my viewpoint, of course, is an emotional one. It's not an academic one. And I think that it's hugely, hugely important to get art like this out. And I think that the overwhelming response that we've got from audiences everywhere is actually a strong testimonial that there's a real need for it out there. And by the way, the comment from the academic may have been slightly misconstrued, though the question about victimhood did come somewhere else. That comment had more to do with the fact that narratives of personal violence are very seductive, and we can get seduced into focusing on them to the detriment of other larger issues that are maybe bubbling at a slower pace. A very interesting academic comment, but nonetheless, does not, doesn't really, mitigate the need for efforts like these to continue.
Okay, thank you, Virji. There's a couple of people who have actually, mentioned a comment, which is, you've done a great job presenting the information to everybody. The show actually looks very intriguing and very interesting. So obviously when the show comes to the respective cities, everybody is planning on watching it. Some people have asked if they can help in any way to promote this cause. And how might they be able to get in touch with you, for example, in the future regarding this?
Okay. So the best way to get in touch with me on anything that is Kultar's Mime related is through km1984@sikri.org. There are many ways in which people can help. Every performance of Kultar's Mime has been free, but all of us know that nothing is free. It takes a fair amount of money to fly 8 people, halfway across the world, put them up, and so on, hire theaters, and so on and so forth. So if anybody wants to bring Kultar's Mime to their community, what they should really be looking to do is to pull together a small local group that can pull together some financing and funding to fly the team in there, to put them up, to find a theater, and then promote the play within local audiences, both Sikh and even more importantly, non-Sikh. So if you send an email to km1984@sikhri.org, just like the gentleman who potentially wanted to bring it to Europe, we're happy to get all of those conversations initiated. And really, the critical factor in all of this is finding some local sponsors who are willing to raise the funding and who are willing to do the legwork. The team is eager. The actors, those of you who have seen the play know, throw everything that they have into their performances. It's a powerful production, and we are happy to go wherever we're invited, no matter how large or small the audience is.
For people who have smaller communities in their cities, is the play available online? Has been, a couple of questions from the audience today.
Yeah, that's another great question. So the nature of the play is such, it's an immersive play, and it doesn't really lend itself to being photographed with a camera. If you just photograph a performance and put it up on YouTube or wherever, it's really going to lose most of its impact. There is a possibility that the work will essentially be repurposed for television or film, which will probably require some re-engineering of the script, a whole new approach, professional filmmakers. There have been many requests of that nature. It's something on our radar, but not something that's actively being worked. So for now, it's pretty much going to stay a theatrical production. And I think webinars like this are probably helpful in getting the broader community get a sense of the production. But you really have to see it to get the impact.
Okay, thank you. We are encroaching close to time, and I don't see any more questions also. I think it might be okay if we actually go towards the closing. Would you have any closing comments, Virji, that
No,
you'd like to know say to the audience?
I will just take a moment to thank the audience for being here. And I also want to take a second to acknowledge the team that's pulled this together, J Mehr Kaur, who wrote this and co-directed this, the fine cast of actors who have poured in so much into the production, my assistant director, Purnima Kirby, who did a lot of the movement design for the play, and most importantly, you can't imagine how many people have touched this production. Every city that we've gone to, we've had, spectacular hospitality, people putting us up, taking care of us, making arrangements. So I can't thank all the volunteers and hosts enough. And finally, the Sikh Research Institute. It was really the vision of the Sikh Research Institute that made this possible. Because when I had my first conversation with Harinder Singh, all that I had was a script. I didn't have a cast. I had nothing else. It was just an idea. It had been performed once by a high school audience. So it took guts to embrace this, to find the funding for this. So I just want to thank the Sikh Research Institute for providing a platform for what has become a success, certainly beyond my wildest imagination. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Virji. One last question that just popped up. Is there a website that is available to get more information or the schedule for the play potentially in the future? Somebody wants to attend the play in Mumbai and was wondering who should he contact?
Sure. So the Sikhri website is the best place to get current information. What happens is that the upcoming shows and links to where people can get tickets and who to contact are always put up on the Sikhri website. If they aren't on there already, we'll make sure that they're up there in a day or two. But www.sikhri.org is the place to go to. And there are actually Facebook events. I'm fairly easy to find on Facebook, so if people send me messages, I will just invite them to the events. but the best way to do this in a scalable, reliable manner is the Sikri website.
Okay, thank you. That was great. Thank you all for your questions. Please be reminded that these webinars are provided for free, but there is a cost associated with this technology and administration. If you feel you have benefited from this particular webinar or others in the past, please consider making a donation to Sikri or becoming a webinar sponsor. More details can be obtained in a follow-up email you will receive or by emailing info@sikri.org. I'd like to thank the presenter for taking the time and enlightening us with information that should help us, create an atmosphere of community and action in the future. I'd like to thank the audience for coming today and to remind everyone to wait a few seconds for the link to appear to a follow-up survey. Your time and suggestions are extremely valuable to the Sikh Research Institute, and we appreciate you coming out here listening to Sarbpreet Singh's presentation. Thank you all. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.